Every nation's collapse begins the same way. First, they isolate the truth, then they criminalize it, and then they bury the man who speaks it. That is exactly what's at stake if Mkhwanazi loses in court, because state capture doesn't need bullets to win, it just needs a judge. Because once you discredit a whistleblower at his level, you don't just silence a man, you erase evidence, intimidate witnesses, and make corruption legally untouchable. Then the law enforcement stops guarding citizens and starts guarding the network, tender brokers, political fixers, cartel billionaires, and their judges for hire. Tonight, we expose the 10 looming risks South Africa faces if his efforts fail, a future still influenced by those who have historically undermined the nation. Brace yourself, our expose narrator unveils restricted investigations, seized Hawks logs, Madlanga dockets, and classified reports the public was never meant to see. Dr. Kumla, South Africa stands on the brink. This trial isn't just about law, it's about power. If he falls, the gangsters walk openly through the Republic's front door. Before we continue, don't just watch, defy the silence. Hit like, share, and subscribe so this investigation can't be quietly erased later.
When the courtroom lights dim and the microphones click off, South Africans are left asking one quiet question. What happens if Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi loses in court? This isn't about a single officer or a single judgment, it's about the architecture that holds the republic upright. Mkhwanazi's testimony, threaded through years of commission evidence and leaked dockets, became the symbolic firewall between captured institutions and the faint hope of renewal. If that firewall cracks, the same machinery that once rewired tenders, blocked homicide probes, and buried audit reports could reboot under legal cover. Imagine it as a systemic risk modeling scenario. Once a precedent discredits a whistleblower of this rank, entire compliance ecosystems inside SAPS, Treasury, and the NPA become vulnerable to administrative rollback. 10. The Procurement Syndicate. Durban, Johannesburg, Port Elizabeth. This was never just about invoices. It's a triangle of control that runs from the port cranes to the cargo bays through to municipal IT servers. Docket Series KZN 225-2016, archived under the Durban Metro Financial Crimes Unit, shows how emergency procurement forms were copy-crossed across 3 provinces listing identical vendor codes. Each copy carried a different signature but pointed to the same shell company registered in Bedford View. Mkhwanazi's testimony exposed the public sector integrity audit that froze those vendor codes, proof that a handful of officers could still jam the machinery. If his credibility collapses, that audit lineage dies with him. The procurement captains, many of whom re-emerged as consultants, will quietly reactivate old shell paths. Insurance analysts would call it risk exposure rating, the kind that forces higher premiums for national projects because due diligence becomes performative. In a country where urgent supply became code for no oversight, this triangle could open overnight, layered through new shells and municipal intermediaries, invisible to both Hawks and Treasury monitors. Filed as KZN 225-2016, cross-referenced GP 312-2018, Treasury Forensics. Now picture the ports on a windy Tuesday. Containers offloaded Voetstuts, invoices stamped urgent for security gear the city never receives, and a cousin's close corporation in Umhlanga suddenly specializing in data migration. The paper trail looks proper: 3 quotes, conflict of interest forms, a risk note copied from last year's tender. But the outcome is the same ukes getting paid for moving air. The triangle works because each vertex gives the other cover. Durban's emergency becomes Joburg's piggyback, and Gqeberha's depot signs off because Johannesburg already approved. If the court knocks out the man who pulled this pattern into the light, middle managers will learn the lesson. Don't ask, just sign. Treasury's red flags module can be throttled by configuration reviews, while city CFOs outsource assurance to the very firms that drafted the specs. By December, the same buckies deliver critical network switches to a locked storeroom, and the service level agreements get extended for stability. On paper, everything hums. On the ground, clinics wait for parts that never arrive, and ratepayers fund a triangle that never sleeps. 9. The docket drift. How transfers bury justice. Buried deep in the NPA's internal logs, GP 422-2017 shows an eerie pattern. Murder and corruption files tagged transferred without destination notes. It's the bureaucratic dark matter of state capture, the space where cases vanish without being closed. Mkhwanazi had testified that these administrative transfers became the legal disguise for obstruction, especially in politically sensitive murders. If his account is invalidated, docket transfers will again become a legitimate discretion. The global analogy is chilling. Picture a U.S. Justice Department where corruption cases can be rerouted into limbo just by filing an internal memo. In South Africa, it means suspects in high-profile asset recovery contingencies could walk free, claiming reallocation delays. Prosecutors would lose morale, while private insurers reassess the entire justice chain as a policyholder confidence index. No one insures a system that can't enforce its own verdicts. Catalogued as docket series GP 422-2017, linked to NPA Internal Routing Memo 14-2018. Here's how it plays on the ground. A hit on a ward counselor is opened in Soweto, briefly worked by a sharp detective who's already juggling 6 bodies. A week later, a supervisor marks the matter for the Complex Crimes Unit, but the courier bag to the unit never leaves the registry. The family phones. The officer says it's with head office now. Months pass, witnesses move, phones get swapped, and the bakkie used in the drive-by is stripped in a backyard in Eldos. By the time the docket surfaces, the chain of custody is a dog's breakfast, exhibits misfiled, call detail records expired, CCTV overwritten. In court, defense counsel points to the gaps and says, reasonable doubt. Case withdrawn provisionally. When these transfers become culture, cops learn to stall instead of solve. Good investigators burn out or take medical leave. Communities see blue lights and think admin, not justice. The fix is simple but brutal. Lock transfer logs to unique scan codes, publish monthly movement dashboards, and cap the number of hops any violent crime file can make, and hold the sign-off kernel liable for every day of delay. Without that, transfer is just a softer word for delete. 8. Borderline capture. The return of the customs cartel. On paper, customs reform was one of Mkhwanazi's quieter victories. He forced interagency tasking between SARS intelligence and border police, curbing the fuel smuggling rings that moved contraband from Batesbridge to Durban. But inside EC 2014-2018, the Eastern Cape Logistics Docket, investigators logged a curious note. Pending structural review, transferred to National Archives. Translation, frozen oversight. If his testimony fails, that interagency fusion could dissolve, reopening the corridor for syndicates that feed counterfeit pharmaceuticals, fuel, and firearms into the economy.
Each truckload dodging tax duty compounds the insurance risk mitigation burden on national logistics carriers and inflates the fiscal compliance framework exposure across entire supply chains. A senior SARS analyst speaking off record once called it capture with a clipboard. All signatures, no fingerprints. And if those clipboards return unchecked, the Batesbridge-Durban corridor becomes a living example of how borders collapse from within, one form at a time. Filed as EC 2014-2018, status transferred to National Archives 2019. Stand at dawn near Musina and you'll see the rhythm. A convoy of tankers and flatbeds inching forward, drivers swapping SIM cards, a fixer with a lever arch file getting 5 stamps in 5 minutes. No bribes spoken, just expedite fees paid via a wholesaler shelf account in Lenasia. The bill of lading lists lubricant-based stock, but the density says diesel, and the route note says local transit, which means duty deferred, which means the load can disappear in Limpopo and reappear in KZN as import returned. When the fusion center was live, those patterns triggered joint stops. Border police pulled the rig, SARS scanned the tank, and suddenly the math didn't balance. If that center is mothballed after a court loss, syndicates will test the fence by Christmas. Expect ghost depots popping up outside Pietermaritzburg, counterfeit meds in township spazas with sample stickers still on the boxes, and a quiet spike in cash-in transit crew funding as cheap fuel fattens margins. The country won't notice it first, prices will even dip, but the tax hole will widen, insurers will reprice routes, and honest haulers will bleed while skelms ride free. The cure is stubborn. Lock interagency tasking in law, publish seizure heat maps, ban structural review from pausing live risk flags, and rotate customs heads away from single corridor capture every 6 months. Without that, borders become suggestions, not lines. Every file you've heard so far sketches a map of what capture looks like when paperwork becomes policy. If these patterns sound too familiar, it's because they are. Subscribe, keep the lights on this investigation, and make sure the next docket isn't sealed in silence. Up next, what happens when the people who write the budgets start rewriting the truth?
7. The Treasury loop. Budgets that write themselves. Inside Treasury's internal workflow system, flagged under GP 611-2019, lies an audit note labeled Circular Reinstatement, Legacy Template Reactivated. Translated from bureaucracy, it means a disbanded rulebook was quietly switched back on. Mkhwanazi's testimony froze those legacy templates because they let accounting officers push pre-approved vendor pools into new budgets without retendering. When that freeze took effect, several politically connected CFOs had to cancel continuation payments. If the court trashes his evidence, that guardrail disappears. The same units will relaunch stability-based procurement, a phrase that sounds noble but smells of capture. Each resuscitated template becomes a license to bill. Auditors will chase ghost line items, R48 million for digitization upgrades on buildings with no internet, or fleet sustainment fees for cars already sold at auction. In Joburg, you'll hear, "Ach, standard process, chief," while a template-driven invoice moves from subvote to subvote like a hot potato. The effect on insurers and lenders is blunt. Where budgets are circular, risk is linear. Underwriters raise premiums on national projects because due diligence becomes performative. Watch the telltales. 3 quotes sourced from the same mailbox domain, a business continuity memo that overrides market testing, and evaluation panels cocked with acting managers. In global terms, it mirrors a U.S. state reissuing expired pork barrel authorities, fiscal déjà vu disguised as reform. Systems that once flagged vendor duplication will be under configuration review, giving cover for recycled panels to greenlight the same shelf firms with fresh names. Quietly, procurement integrity platforms lose their bite. The dashboards still glow, but exceptions are waved through by executive note. Mid-year adjustments then launder overruns into technical corrections, and the public only sees the headline, funds shifted, projects stabilized. To reverse this loop, Parliament must criminalize template resurrection without a fresh competitive process, mandate public posting of all exception notes, and bind Treasury to quarterly variance hearings with subpoena power. Without that, the budget will write itself, line by ghost line, while risk exposure rating models reprice the Republic for drift. 6. The Ghost Payroll Protocol, Salaries for the Silent. The phrase ghost employee once sounded like office banter. In docket FS 173-2020, it is literal. Payroll investigators traced thousands of monthly salary payments to IDs belonging to deceased or retired officers. Others were still active long after resignations. Mkhwanazi's reform team fused Home Affairs and Treasury data to flag anomalies in real time. Matches triggered immediate pay stop and on-site verification. If his framework dies in court, the fusion project dies too.
HR would drift back to quarterly reconciliations, 3 months of free play for syndicates that keep bank accounts alive. Clerks process batch files late on Fridays. A supervisor signs per delegation, and a private courier moves sealed envelopes between buildings to preserve the theater of control.
The cash-out method is old school. ATM withdrawals in small towns at staggered times, then EFT sweeps disguised as loan repayments to microlenders that exist on paper only. Banks raise soft alerts. Disciplinary boards meet next term. Meanwhile, a real ICU nurse in Ntatha works double shifts while a ghost bleeds the vote dry. This is not theory. It is the slow puncture that turns budgets into excuses. Globally, it resembles corporate ghost billing through dormant subsidiaries. Same signatures, same rubber stamps, same nobody home. The fix is brutal but clean. Quarterly biometric re-verification for every payroll, an immutable movement ledger per employee number, and automatic suspension of any account not re-authenticated in 30 days. Union concerns are solvable with mobile enrollment vans and grievance fast lanes. What's not solvable is taxpayers funding phantoms. If the court guts the reforms, expect payroll risk to be treated by pension and health underwriters as a structural defect, not a blip. That means pricier guarantees and stricter covenants for provincial treasuries. In that world, public sector integrity audits detect patterns but cannot enforce them. The enforcement teeth were the fusion triggers and the instant pay stops. Lose those, and you lose deterrence. The only winners are the skelms who perfected silence. South Africans will keep paying, and the ghosts will keep earning. 5. The intelligence blind spot. Files that forget to exist. When the Intelligence Fusion Center in Tshwane was shuttered in 2020, the official line cited budgetary reprioritization. Docket NW 305219 tells a different story. Counterintelligence briefs marked restricted, not for submission, containing surveillance on cartel money flowing into political campaigns and municipal tenders. Mkhwanazi's statement forced a temporary bridge to the Treasury's Financial Intelligence Unit. If his credibility collapses, that bridge goes with him. Archives snap shut behind national security, and analysts are told to stay in mandate. That is how capture mutates, by classifying corruption as confidential. The technical damage is surgical. Link charts stop updating, watch lists go stale, and lawful interception budgets slide into consulting while data centers are mothballed pending strategy. The syndicates adapt faster than policy. Careers rotate SIMs, campaign slush funds pivot to crypto rails, and the audit horizon shortens until tomorrow is already too late. Internationally, this looks like a bank switching off transaction monitoring because fraudsters complained about privacy. You cannot run a republic on vibes. You need AML KYC enforcement that treats politically exposed risk as a living system, not a quarterly PDF. Without it, you get briefing notes that say insufficient indicators, which is bureaucrat code for we didn't look. Reintegration is possible. Legislate a corruption declassification rule. Any evidence of public office enrichment is presumptively public. Mandate joint tasking orders with fixed time windows, and publish a redacted quarterly heat map of financial crime typologies so civil society can aim at subpoenas.
Until then, reinsurers reading the cyber espionage line items will classify the state as a soft target with poor due diligence analytics, and premium curves will move accordingly. On the pavement, the signs are simple. Fewer joint raids, more strategy sessions, whistle trackers told to hand in laptops, and the sudden return of consultants who promise election readiness to cities that cannot reconcile their own vendor roles. Files won't burn, they'll just forget to exist. 4. The prosecutorial pendulum. Cases that die on the desk. Every prosecutor knows the pendulum. Push too hard, and the case is reassigned. In WC 208-2015, a Cape Town corruption matter against a former provincial MEC was transferred 5 times in 8 months. Each transfer reset the trial clock. Each new lead had to familiarize. Mkhwanazi's testimony spurred a draft directive capping transfers at 2 per case and forcing public logs for movement. Remove him from the equation, and the cap evaporates. Resource balancing returns as a respectable way to stall politically hot files.
On the ground, it looks harmless. A polite email, a registry note, and a new diary date 3 months out. Witnesses cool, digital exhibits expire, and a confident defense points to chain of custody gaps as proof that the state cannot prove its own story. Communities clock the pattern and stop reporting. The Republic bleeds legitimacy quietly, like a tire you never patched. Internationally, it resembles deferred prosecution theater on Wall Street. Delay until fatigue wins, then settle on terms that mean nothing. The actuarial consequence is severe. Governance risk models mark down the fiscal compliance framework. Lenders widen spreads, and insurers attach behavior clauses to performance guarantees, because justice is a credit metric too. The fix needs law and spine. Publish an immutable docket movement ledger. Criminalize administrative obstruction with mandatory minimums, and require a senior prosecutor's signed reasons for any transfer after indictment. Pair that with time-bound asset recovery contingency triggers. If funds aren't frozen by day 7 post-charge, the case auto-flags to a national recovery team. South Africans don't want hero speeches, they want a calendar that bites. If the whistleblower loses, expect the pendulum to swing back to cozy equilibrium, where hard files float to the top only when the accused are already dead or the paperwork is. Justice cannot live on reassignment alone. It needs custody, speed, and public sunlight. Anything less is a desk killing a case. Every scenario so far sketches not a conspiracy, but a checklist of what happens when oversight collapses in slow motion. The handwriting is civil, the stamp official, the damage national. Each canceled audit, each pending review docket, is a small rehearsal for bigger failures waiting quietly in the files. If this investigation speaks to you, don't just scroll, stand witness. Like, share, and subscribe so the data trail doesn't vanish again into the filing cabinets of denial. Coming up, the final collapse scenarios where borders, banks, and ballots share the same line item.
3. The command chain rollback, promotions that rewire policing. This is where the command chain bends. If the court undercuts Mkhwanazi, the calculus inside stations and provincial HQs changes overnight. Promotions flow to the pliable. Acting posts become bargaining chips. And the few colonels who still say no start getting iced out of rotation. Filed as NAT CC 241, 2017, and cross-referenced to GP 934, 2018, the Internal Review on Command Interference documented how station priorities were rewritten with one memo. Crowd control units starved, while VIP details grew fat. The pattern is subtle. You don't have to fire a straight cop, you just move him sideways, then send him to a course until the docket ages into dust. In plain South African, that's how Skelms win without shooting. You capture the calendar. 2. The Civic Ledger blackout. Beneficial ownership goes fuzzy. Shells thrive in the dark, and corporate shadows are where tender capture finds oxygen. If the court undercuts Mkhwanazi, the calculus inside stations and provincial HQs changes overnight. Promotions flow to the pliable. Acting posts become bargaining chips. And the few colonels who still say no start getting iced out of rotation. Filed as CIPC BO-2023, the guidance that made 5% plus controllers visible was not a bureaucratic tweak. It was a torch. Turn it off, and the old tricks return. Trusts layered through close corporations, nominee directors with 500 employers, and procurement panels told to accept privacy as a justification for redactions. That is how a city winds up paying a Sanditon mailbox for emergency repairs in Galeshewe. If you can't see the owner, you can't avoid the conflict, and you can't claw back the loot. Gray listing taught us that international finance prices opacity. Banks spend more to check less and pass the pain to clients. This is where AML, KYC enforcement meets street reality. A new clinic opens with old wiring because the supplier's brother wrote the spec years before. We'll hear soothing phrases, market sensitivity, data minimization, cyber hygiene, while the registry goes cloudy again.
Don't be fooled, bro. This isn't about privacy, it's about plausible deniability. The antidote is boring and beautiful. Default public access to BO filings, automatic cross-checks between CIPC, SARS, and tender portals, and suspension of any award where the BO record is stale. Throw sunlight at the shares and you'll watch the skittish cash move. For global viewers, picture the Delaware LLC playbook colliding with a municipal budget. Lawful wrappers, unlawful ends. If the whistleblower loses, expect appeals to balance rights to overrule transparency, while independent assurance providers cash fees for reading documents they helped author. The end game is a procurement board boxed by myths it cannot test. Reverse it. Require public reasons for any redaction, empower civil society to query in bulk, and let courts fast-track BO disputes. Without that, procurement integrity platforms will display elegant dashboards that mask ownership fog. And we'll call that progress while the same oaks cut new checks. Tie bank alerts to BO gaps so payments stall before they bleed. 1. The National Evidence Grid. Labs, licenses, and chain of custody. Cases don't collapse in court. They collapse in the lab and the laptop long before a judge arrives. If the ruling undercuts Mkhwanazi, the guardrails that stabilize South Africa's evidence grid will shake loose and the backlog era will find its second wind. Dockets NAT EVD 441-2020 and GP Lab 118-2021 mapped the whole. DNA kits stacked like firewood, ballistics queued behind service contracts, and digital exhibits stuck on drives no one could decrypt because the license lapsed. The fix he pushed was dull and effective. Ring-fenced licenses, barcode chain of custody, and a 7 days to freeze rule that moved money the moment a syndicate target was charged. You could feel it on the ground, fewer postponed remands, fewer accused smiling at technicalities. If that architecture is ruled overreach by implication, the old drift returns. Labs slide back to strategic reviews, fleet contracts eat consumables budget, and detectives are told to prioritize without reagents to test a swab. Defense counsel don't need miracles, they just need missing timestamps. Do it long enough and serious violence prosecutions start falling like dominoes. In risk language, underwriters call this structural. Claims rise because deterrence fails, and insurance risk mitigation becomes price, not prevention. For a US watcher, imagine homicide indictments tossed because a state lab can't prove who touched the bag. It's lawful, it's insane. The cure we already know. Enforce automated custody logs, publish lab turnaround times weekly, buy licenses for 3 years at a go, and give a national recovery team hard triggers. If a docket names a syndicate asset, asset recovery contingency funding moves in hours, not quarters. Tie provincial grants to real clearance rates and watch the backlog bend. Then staple a domestic fiscal compliance framework to the labs so treasuries can't quietly repurpose the chemicals budget. None of this is romantic, but it's how you keep mothers from visiting courts for anniversaries instead of verdicts. Lose the evidence grid and you lose the republic one chain break at a time, while everyone insists the forms are in order.